Welcome, curious minds, to the deep dive. Today, we're inviting you into a world where the tiniest details, the things most of us just walk past, actually hold the key to some really extraordinary secrets.
Yeah, it's this idea that human behavior isn't just random, it's like a puzzle. You just need the right way of looking at it.
Exactly. What if, the biggest mysteries aren't solved by some grand revelation, but by noticing the smallest things, the overlooked stuff?
It's a really compelling idea. That truth is often hiding right there in plain sight, but we don't notice it.
So that's our mission today. We're doing a deep dive into the mind, the methods of one of literature's absolute icons, Sherlock Holmes.
We're going to try and dissect how his brain works, really. How he takes these scattered little facts, things that seem totally unrelated, and somehow turns them into solid, irrefutable truths.
And maybe, just maybe, figure out what his whole approach tells us about, us, about the human condition, our blind spots, how easily we're fooled, but also how clever we can be.
And we're going straight to the source for this. We're using the original stories, the narratives as they were written. No adaptations, just the real deal.
So get ready, sharpen your own observation skills, because you're about to see things, maybe even your own life, a little bit differently. Through Holmes's eyes. Okay, let's dive in.
Right, so where do we start? The beginning, I suppose. The first meeting between Holmes and Watson. It's pretty iconic.
It really is. You've got Dr. Watson just back from Afghanistan. He's seen things, he's been through it. All he wants is peace and quiet.
He actually says he wants a studious and quiet lodger. Someone who won't bring much noise or excitement into his life. He's had enough of that,
Famous last words, right? Because the person he ends up sharing rooms with is, Sherlock Holmes.
Introduced by this mutual friend, Stamford. And Stamford straight up warns Watson, doesn't he? He describes Holmes's studies as desultory and eccentric, sort of all over the place.
He does. He mentions Holmes knows all this out-of-the-way knowledge that would just baffle his professors. It's not about textbook learning for Holmes.
No, it's about practical stuff. Knowledge he can use. Stamford even says something like, Holmes will probably figure you out faster than you figure him out.
And Watson's just thinking about rent, basically. A quiet place to recover. He has absolutely no idea what he's signing up for.
Stamford mentions how Holmes can disappear for weeks or just work nonstop, morning till night. You get this immediate sense of his intensity, his slightly obsessive nature.
Definitely. And Watson finds out pretty quickly just how different Holmes's mind is. He starts noticing this selective ignorance Holmes has.
It's not just that he doesn't know things. It's like he actively chooses not to know certain things. It's bizarre.
Yeah, like contemporary literature, philosophy, politics. Watson finds out Holmes knows next to nothing about them. He's genuinely shocked.
The best bit is when Watson quotes Thomas Carlyle, this famous writer, and Holmes just asks, completely straight-faced, who he might be and what he had done.
It's almost funny, isn't it? This brilliant mind, and he doesn't know who Carlyle is.
And it gets worse. Or, stranger. Watson discovers Holmes doesn't know about the Copernican theory. The Earth revolving around the sun, basic astronomy.
He's completely ignorant of how the solar system works, and it's not like he just missed that day in school. It's deliberate.
Exactly. Holmes actually explains it. He has this whole philosophy about the brain being like an attic, You only fill it with useful tools.
He says, no man burdens his mind with small matters, unless he has some very good reason for doing so. It's about mental efficiency.
Which, when you think about it, especially now with information overload everywhere, it's kind of brilliant. He's basically decluttering his mind.
Right. Clearing out the junk so he has space for what actually matters for his work. It's intense focus. Makes you think about all the useless stuff we fill our heads with every day.
It really does. He's prioritizing information like crazy, making sure his mental tools are sharp and ready for the job.
And that job, that science of deduction, as he calls it, he's not shy about his abilities, even early on.
Not at all. He makes these incredible claims, like he can tell a man's inmost thoughts just from a momentary expression, a twitch of a muscle, or a glance of an eye.
He genuinely believes his conclusions are as certain as math proofs. As infallible as so many propositions of Euclid, he says, he sees it as an exact science.
Which must have sounded completely wild to Watson at first, like magic, or as Holmes puts it, necromantic, to someone who doesn't understand the process.
But he insists it's all logical steps, and the foundation is just this incredible attention to detail, like the cigar ashes.
Ah, yes, the monograph. He boasts he can tell any brand of cigar just by looking at the ash.
It sounds quirky, maybe even trivial, but for Holmes, that's crucial data. It shows how nothing is too small, nothing is irrelevant if it's a fact.
It's all about observation. As he says, from a single drop of water, you could logically figure out the possibility of an Atlantic Ocean. It's about seeing the potential in the tiny details.
Okay, so I've got the theory, the philosophy. Let's see it in action. Those early cases where he really proves his point.
Right, and the perfect place to start is that very first deduction he makes about Watson himself, the Afghanistan connection.
Watson is completely floored, isn't he? Holmes just meets him and says, basically, "You've been in Afghanistan. How could you possibly know that?"
Watson even checks if Stanford tipped him off. But no, Holmes explains it was pure deduction.
He says the train of thoughts ran so swiftly through my mind, he didn't even notice the steps at first, but he can break it down.
And he does. He walks Watson through it. Military bearing, but medical type. Army doctor. Tan face. Just back from the tropics. Injured arm. Where would an English army doctor get injured in the tropics recently? Afghanistan. Boom.
It's brilliant, just connecting these observed facts, working backward logically. Observation with me is second nature, he says. It's just how his mind works.
And this unique skill defines his job, right? He calls himself the only one in the world, a consulting detective.
Yeah, he explains how the regular police, the private eyes, when they're stuck, they come to him.
They lay out all the evidence and he puts them on the right scent. He uses his knowledge of crime history, his eye for detail, those rules of deduction.
The ones Watson initially scoffed at in that article.
Exactly. Proving they're actually invaluable in practical work.
Yeah.
He's like the detective's detective, the problem solver for impossible problems.
Which brings us perfectly to A Study in Scarlet, his first big case, the one that really shows everyone what he can do, and it completely stumps Scotland Yard.
It starts with this really eerie scene, doesn't it? A dead man, Enoch Drebber, found in an empty house on Brixton Road. The house itself looks creepy, ill-omened.
And the details are just weird. No obvious cause of death, no wound. But there's this word, R-A-Uch, written in blood on the wall.
Right, R-A-I-C-H,
Yeah.
in blood. And there's a woman's gold ring near the body,
Yeah.
too. It makes no sense. Seems designed to confuse.
The police, Gregson and Lestrade, they're baffled, throwing out theories left and right. But Holmes arrives and he's just different.
He's got his tools ready, the tape measure, the big magnifying glass, and he just gets to work.
Watson describes him moving like a well-trained foxhound, kneeling, lying flat on the floor, examining things nobody else even sees.
He's measuring invisible marks, finding tiny clues. He spends 20 minutes just absorbing the scene, muttering, whistling, already putting the pieces together.
And he spots things immediately, like the footprints outside. Even though the police have already trampled around, he can tell they were distinct sets of prints.
And the cigar ash again? That becomes a key clue for him, something Gregson and Lestrade would completely ignore. He points out that's where the skilled detective differs from them.
He also mentions seeing the impression of a florid face in the dust, but he keeps his cards close to his chest initially. He doesn't give away everything he knows.
No, he lets the clues build. The R-A-I-C-H, the ring. They seem random, but he knows they're part of the puzzle. He's already forming a picture.
Then comes that incredibly dramatic part with the pills, the experiment.
Oh yeah, that's pure Holmes theater, but also incredibly effective. He gets these two pills, identical looking. One's harmless, one's poison.
And he basically forces this poor dog, a terrier, to take one. It dies instantly.
It's brutal, but it proves his theory about how Drebber died, that the killer forced him to choose one of two pills, leaving it to chance, or providence, as the killer later says. It confirms the unseen murder method.
It shows his willingness to test hypotheses, even in quite extreme ways. It's very scientific in a grim sort of way.
And then the motive is revealed, which is just epic. This whole backstory with Jefferson Hope.
Right. It completely reframes the crime. It's not political like the police thought. It's deeply personal revenge.
We learn about John Ferrier and his adopted daughter Lucy, their life with the Mormons in Salt Lake City, and how Lucy was forced to choose between marrying Drebber or another elder, Stangerson, even though she loved Jefferson Hope.
This is a tragic story. They try to escape, flee through the mountains.
But Lucy dies, and her father is killed too.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking.
And Jefferson Hope, he just snaps, basically. Vows revenge, spends decades, literally decades, hunting Drebber and Stangerson across continents.
He carries Lucy's wedding ring the whole time, a constant reminder. He says they thought they could tire him out, but they couldn't. His mission was everything.
When Holmes finally arranges Hope's capture, Hope is surprisingly calm. He just confesses everything.
Yeah, tells him how he tracked them down, gave Drebber the choice of pills, and how he ended up stabbing Stangerson in self-defense when he resisted.
And the R-A-C-H. Just a red herring. Something he remembered from another case, written in his own blood to throw the police off. Simple, but effective.
It just highlights how wrong the official detectives were. Gregson and Lestrade were miles off, thinking it was political intrigue or secret societies.
Holmes, meanwhile, figured it out in 3 days. And he calls the case simple. He lets the Yard take the credit, mostly.
He has that slightly cynical view, doesn't he? What you do is a matter of no consequence. The question is, what can you make people believe that you have done? The intellectual puzzle is his real reward.
Okay, so Study in Scarlet sets the stage. Let's look at some other cases that show different facets of his genius. How about The Sign of the Four? That one's got everything.
Oh, absolutely. Treasure, betrayal, exotic locations, a boat chase. It starts quite mysteriously, though, with Mary Morstan.
Right, she comes to Holmes because she's been getting these valuable pearls, one each year for 6 years, from someone anonymous.
And then she gets this letter inviting her to a meeting, telling her to bring 2 friends. She can bring police if she wants, but the letter advises against it.
Naturally, Holmes is intrigued, and he insists Watson comes along as one of the friends, pulling Watson deeper into this adventurous life.
The meeting is with Thaddeus Sholto. They're described as a strange, jerky little fellow, and he spills this incredible story about the Agro treasure.
It involves his father, Major Sholto, and Mary's father, Captain Morstan. They apparently got hold of this massive treasure back in India.
But there was betrayal involved. Major Sholto double-crossed Morstan and maybe others too. There's this deathbed confession from the Major, full of fear and secrets about the treasure.
The plot really kicks off when Thaddeus's brother, Bartholomew, actually finds the hidden treasure. But then he's immediately murdered.
And in a really bizarre way. Killed by a poisoned thorn, of all things. The treasure chest is empty. And there's this weird footprint from a wooden-legged man.
Plus that strange smell, like tar or creosote, in the room, and a hole in the ceiling. It's a very unusual crime scene.
This is where Holmes gets creative. He brings in Toby, the dog.
The creosote-sniffing mongrel. Genius. Using the unique smell left by the wooden leg to track the killer.
Which leads to that fantastic chase scene on the River Thames. Holmes and Watson in a steam launch, chasing the killer, Jonathan Small, and his accomplice, Tonga.
Tonga is terrifying. This small man from the Andaman Islands using a blowpipe with poison darts. It's incredibly dramatic.
When they finally catch Small, his confession explains everything. His time in India during the mutiny, how he and 3 Sikh allies got the treasure.
Then his imprisonment on the Andaman Islands, this brutal penal colony, how he met Tonga there, and how they escaped and hunted down Major Sholto for revenge and the treasure. Small feels he was cheated.
But the ending is almost sad. The treasure chest, empty. Small threw all the jewels into the Thames during the chase.
He calls the treasure a curse, brought nothing but murder and misery. Mary Morstan, who is potentially incredibly rich, ends up with nothing.
Well, not quite nothing. Watson realizes he loves her, regardless of the money, which prompts Holmes's famous line about love being emotional and opposed to his cold reason. He observes it, but doesn't feel it himself.
A perfect segue into A Scandal in Bohemia, the case where emotion, or rather intellect, combined with perhaps some feeling, actually defeats Holmes.
Ah, yes. Irene Adler, the woman, as Holmes always called her afterwards. It's a rare instance of him being outmaneuvered.
It starts with royalty. The King of Bohemia comes to Holmes in disguise, needing help.
He needs to get back a compromising photograph of himself with Irene Adler, who's this famous opera singer. He's about to marry a princess, and the photo could cause a huge scandal.
So Holmes hatches this incredibly elaborate plan. Disguises, fake fights, even a staged fire alarm with a smoke rocket.
He disguises himself as a clergyman, engineers this whole scenario to trick Irene into revealing where she hid the photo. He figures in a panic, she'll instinctively go for her most valuable possession.
He's relying on his understanding of psychology, specifically as he sees it, female psychology. And he thinks he's got her.
But she's smarter. She sees right through it. Maybe the clergyman disguise wasn't quite perfect, or maybe she was just incredibly sharp.
She figures out she's being watched, who is watching her, and what they're after. She manages to flee with her new husband, taking the original photograph with her.
But she leaves a note for Holmes, and her own photograph, explaining she means the king no harm. She's happy now, but she's keeping the photo just in case, as insurance.
The best part is when she, disguised as a young man, actually passes Holmes on the street outside his own door later that night and says, "Good night, Mr. Sherlock Holmes." She totally had his number.
It's a brilliant countermove. And Holmes is, for once, genuinely impressed. Humbled, even.
He usually jokes about women's cleverness, often quite dismissively, but Irene Adler earns his deepest respect. He asks for her photograph as his only payment from the king.
He keeps it too. A reminder, perhaps, that logic isn't everything, and underestimating opponents is dangerous. It reinforces his view that emotion complicates things, but here, Intelligence and perhaps a woman's resolve beat his cold reason.
Okay, from royalty and opera singers to something seemingly much more mundane, but equally puzzling. The Red-Headed League.
This one starts so strangely. This pawnbroker, Jabez Wilson, comes in. Very stout, very red hair, and he tells this story.
About being hired by this mysterious Red-Headed League just because of his hair color to do this pointless job copying an encyclopedia.
For really good money, too. £4 a week, which was a lot then. Just sit in an office and copy. Seems too good to be true.
And then, suddenly, the League just dissolves. Poof! The job's gone. The whole thing was supposedly funded by this eccentric American millionaire's will.
Holmes smells a rat immediately, right? The whole setup is just too bizarre. So he investigates.
He goes to Wilson's pawn shop, checks out the area, but he pays special attention to the assistant, this young man named Vincent Spaulding.
He notices Spaulding's trousers are dirty at the knees, and that Spaulding is into photography, which involves going into the cellar. Tiny details.
But enough for Holmes to figure it out. He realizes a considerable crime is in contemplation.
And he's spot on. The Red-Headed League was just a distraction, a way to get Jabez Wilson out of his shop for hours every day.
While Wilson was busy copying, Spaulding, who's actually a notorious criminal named John Clay, was digging a tunnel from the pawnshop cellar into the vault of the bank next door.
Brilliant, really. The League disappearing meant the tunnel was finished, and they planned to rob the bank over the weekend, giving them plenty of time to escape.
But Holmes is faster. He puts together a team, Inspector Jones, the bank director, and they lie in wait in the vault.
And they catch Clay red-handed, emerging from the tunnel. Case closed. Or rather, crime prevented.
It shows Holmes's ability to see the underlying pattern, the criminal logic, behind something that just looks weird on the surface. He loves these little problems to escape the ordinary.
Let's switch gears again. A case of identity. This one is less about grand crime, more about domestic deception, but just as complex.
It starts with Miss Mary Sutherland. Her fiancé, a Mr. Hosmer Angel, literally vanished from the cab on the way to their wedding. Just gone.
And there were odd conditions to their courtship, like all letters had to be typewritten. He was very shy, whispered, wore dark glasses, all quite peculiar.
Adding to the weirdness is her stepfather, Mr. Windibank. He was apparently very controlling, didn't like her socializing, kept her close.
That controlling behavior is a huge clue for Holmes, isn't it? Suggests a motive for interfering in her life, especially her romantic life.
Holmes focuses, as always, on the small stuff. He notices Miss Sutherland's glove is torn, her fingers have ink stains. From this, he figures out she must have typed the letters herself in a rush.
And he pieces together the description of Hosmer Angel. The quiet voice, the shyness, the glasses. It all points to a disguise.
And the shocking truth. Hosmer Angel was the stepfather, Mr. Windibank, in disguise.
Holmes figures it out partly through the typewriter. He realizes typewriters have individual quirks, like handwriting. He compares the Hosmer Angel letters to Windibank's typing.
Match. The whole elaborate charade was just to stop Mary from marrying and keep control of her inheritance money. He faked the disappearance to leave her heartbroken, but still devoted to this phantom fiancé. It's incredibly cruel.
It is. And Holmes confronts Windibank, traps him, lays out the whole deception. It might be a domestic complication, but Holmes treats the deceit with the seriousness it deserves. Justice for the victim.
Moving on to the Boscombe Valley mystery. We leave London for the countryside. A man named McCarthy is murdered, and his own son, James, is the prime suspect.
The evidence looks bad for James. They had argued just before the father was found dead. James admits it. A weapon is found nearby. Seems open and shut.
But Holmes gets called in, and he immediately senses there's more to it. He goes to the scene, Boscombe Pool, and does his usual meticulous examination.
He finds footprints that the local police missed. Specifically, tracks from someone wearing Australian boots and a discarded pipe.
The most brilliant deduction, though, is about the victim's dying words. Witnesses heard something like a rat.
Which makes no sense. But Holmes realizes the victim was trying to say Ballarat, a place in Australia, pointing directly to an Australian connection. He also figures out the cooey call that lured the victim there.
And the truth comes out. The killer is John Turner, a wealthy neighbor who knew the victim from their criminal past in Ballarat, Australia.
The elder McCarthy was blackmailing Turner, threatening to expose his past. Turner finally snapped during an argument at the pool and struck him. He confesses everything to Holmes because he's dying anyway.
And here we see Holmes's interesting moral compass again. Turner confesses, but Holmes decides not to reveal it unless James McCarthy is actually found guilty.
Right. He prioritizes preventing a miscarriage of justice over strictly following the letter of the law. He tells Turner his secret is safe unless it's needed to save the innocent son. It shows a deeper sense of justice.
Finally, let's touch on the 5 orange pips. This one is genuinely chilling. It feels almost supernatural.
It really does. A young man, John Openshaw, comes to Holmes utterly terrified. His uncle died mysteriously, then his father died mysteriously, both after receiving an envelope.
And inside the envelope, 5 orange pips and a note with just the letters KKK.
Holmes immediately connects it to the Ku Klux Klan in America. He figures Openshaw's uncle must have taken incriminating documents belonging to the Klan when he left the U.S.
And the pips are their warning sign, their death threat. The Klan is hunting down anyone connected to those papers. It's revenge on a massive scale.
It becomes this desperate race against time. Holmes realizes John Openshaw is now the target. He tries to warn him, tells him what precautions to take.
But it's too late. Openshaw is found dead, drowned, ruled an accident, but Holmes knows better. The KKK got to him.
It's a rare failure for Holmes, in a sense. He couldn't save his client. It shows the limits of his power against such a ruthless, far-reaching organization. Sometimes the bad guys win, at least initially.
But Holmes doesn't let it go. Even though his client is dead, he wants justice. Or maybe retribution.
Poetic justice, yeah. He finds out the name of the Klan leader responsible, Captain James Calhoun, and the ship he's on.
And he sends an envelope to Calhoun on that ship, containing 5 orange pips, and addressed for the KKK, turning their own symbol against them. A final grim message.
So looking back across all these cases, Holmes truly is this architect of reason. His core method, that idea of reasoning backwards, is key.
Yes, starting with the result, the crime, and working back logically. What must have happened for this result to occur? It's like reverse engineering a situation.
And it's all fueled by that intense observation, making it second nature, like seeing the reddish mud on Watson's shoe and knowing he'd been to a specific post office where the road was dug up.
Things most people wouldn't even register. He says Watson didn't know where to look, so he missed everything important. The suggestiveness of thumbnails, the great issues that may hang from a bootlace.
Because the little things are infinitely the most important. They're the starting points for that backward reasoning. The undeniable facts.
And to keep that reasoning pure, he deliberately avoids emotion, right? Famously saying he'd never marry lest it bias his judgment.
Exactly. Love is an emotional thing, he says, and it's opposed to that true, cold reason. He sees it almost like a flaw. Grit in a sensitive instrument.
It makes him seem cold, detached sometimes, but it's part of his dedication to logic above all else.
And maybe that detachment fuels his need for constant mental stimulation, his brain work.
He says, I cannot live without brain work. What else is there to live for? That explains everything, really. His energy, his boredom, his need for problems to solve.
The world is dreary, dismal, unprofitable without these puzzles to escape from the commonplaces of existence. Crime provides the ultimate mental workout.
Yet, for all his brilliance, he often lets the police take the credit. Gregson, Lestrade. He calls them imbeciles sometimes, but he lets them have the glory.
He knows they're brave, tenacious, even if they lack his insight. And he doesn't seem to care about public recognition. That cynical line again, what you do is a matter of no consequence. The question is, what can you make people believe?
The satisfaction for him is solving it. The elegance of the deduction. Like he says about one case, simple as it was, there were several most instructive points about it. That's his reward.
So we've traced this amazing journey through revenge plots, treasure hunts, royal scandals, clever cons, family secrets, deadly societies. Holmes navigates it all.
He finds the connections, sees the patterns, transforms confusion into clarity, all through observation and deduction.
And the real takeaway, maybe, isn't just enjoying the clever solutions. It's realizing how much we miss because we don't truly look. How much is unnoticed, as Holmes would say.
It really makes you think, what details are we overlooking in our own lives every single day?
A weird pattern, a comment someone made, something that just feels slightly off.
Could cultivating that Holmesian observation as second nature actually change how we understand our own world? Maybe reveal some small mysteries right under our noses.
It's a fascinating thought, isn't it? Turning the ordinary into the extraordinary, just by paying closer attention.